Today's AskReddit post. Surgeons of Reddit, what was your oh shit moment? Oh boy, this is gonna be a good one. Let's get started. Doing a C-section for this poor mum who'd been in labor for hours. Baby wouldn't come out of the hole we made, so more pressure was applied to the fundus, top of the uterus, and suddenly whoosh. Baby zooms out like a torpedo, covered in lubricating vernix, zips over the surgical sheeting which is the texture of a slip and slide and almost rockets straight off the table. The baby's foot was caught by the reg who whipped her up in the air upside down like an old cartoons, but almost dropped her again due to gloves and vernix. Thankfully the midwife was ready with the towel and caught the baby to wrap her up. Mum and dad seemed to think this was normal practice and didn't notice, but me and my colleague just stared at each other with a look of absolute horror. It still makes me shudder to think how close the baby was to hitting the floor head first. Never happened before or since. Doctors were very accommodating and even had a baby juggling routine to put new mothers at ease. 5 stars. Would give birth again. I laughed out loud pretty hard at your review. I'd buy one. One birth. Please. Backhand index finger pointing right. Pregnant woman. Baby angel. I was doing a corneal transplant when I had the oh shit moment. During surgery, I cut off the patient's own cornea and replaced it with a new donor cornea. During that moment when the host cornea was off but before I could get the new one on, there's literally nothing on the front of the eye except a tear film and aqueous humor. Anyway, the patient takes that moment to start vomiting. The reason we tell everyone to skip food and drink is so they don't aspirate in case they throw up. This patient lied about eating breakfast and started throwing up everything. The eye's still open sky at this time. Everything inside of the eye can now become outside of the eye, and she's bucking and vomiting. Those not in the know will say this is not good. Those really in the know will say oh shit. Anyway, I had to grab the new cornea and start stitching as fast as I could on a patient actively throwing up. I used 10-0 nylon sutures which are thinner than an eyelash. It turned out okay but not great. Don't lie about eating breakfast before surgery. Folks, I worked at an ASC for years and it's unreal how many patients come in with full stomachs. I think they need to be made aware of the horrors of eating before surgery. Whenever I'm going under I fast for 12 hours at the least to make sure every single thing has processed and left me. I'm terrified of these anesthesia scenarios. I think it's because most people are just told not to do it but never why they shouldn't do it. Yet that's actually exactly it. I'm just wondering why they don't thoroughly explain it. Plus it saves everyone time. I bring up aspiration, pneumonia and death every time now. I had one bad aspiration event early in my anesthesia career. Guy started puking and I had an LMA in. There was so much volume that he literally filled my circuit with puke after 2 bucks. I had to have a team come in and replace the circuit while I intubated, suctioned, and ambu-bagged. Happened at my hospital. A mentally ill young woman, who was pregnant at the time, was in denial. Locked herself into her room when she realized the contractions were coming. She basically didn't push and the baby didn't come naturally. Her family called 911 because of the smell. They realized her baby had died inside her and was basically rotting due to the smell. She was taken to the OR to remove the baby and apparently all the nurses and surgeons were vomiting because once they opened her up the smell was overpowering and it was traumatizing to see a rotting baby. Edit. Not a surgeon. I'm a hospitalist physician. Time for our eye bleach. Not a surgeon. Thought I'd share this though. Husband went in for a routine colonoscopy and as they were prepping him, anesthetist asks him if he's a ginger. My husband tells him yeah. When he was a kid growing up, he had fire engine red hair, though it's faded to a more strawberry blonde now. The anesthetist laughs and says, okay, I gotcha. We'll give you the redhead dosage and winks. Well, my husband thinks it's a funny, until he wakes up at the tail end of the procedure, pun intended, and doctors are just chatting it up and what have you. Turns out it's not a joke and redheads have some type of natural block to anesthesia. Dude had given him max allowable dosage and he still woke up. Happened a couple years later. They gave him ketamine and some other shit to knock him out to get wisdom teeth out when he told dentist about the colonoscopy thing. He still woke up at the end of that one too. Surgeon here. I've dealt with loads of morbid stuff, but one thing that made me stop and go oh shit was a conversation with a young patient who had a perforated colon from diverticular disease, which is a common wear and tear of the colon. He was one of youngest patients I had seen with this condition, and certainly the youngest with a perforation so bad as to require an operation. And when I was counseling him on the operation, which involves removing the perforated part of the colon and giving him a colostomy, he told me his biggest concern was how he was going to have anal sex with his same-sex partner. He would only have a small stump of rectum left inside, which would be at risk of perforation with any force applied to it. It made me really think about the implications of the surgery we do. The operation is the easy part. I have Crohn's and I've often wondered about this exact scenario. Is there a way to save enough so that a gay man wouldn't have to give up his sex life? I'm not gay, just curious. Badum TSS. Edit. Guy to gay because my Puritan autocorrect disapproves apparently. Some people just get really awful luck in terms of their medical problems ruining their sex life. Sometimes your body just hates you. Plenty of female cancer patients get radiation or chemo that scars their vagina and makes sex all but impossible. Male prostate cancer patients can get permanent erectile dysfunction post-op. At least in this case, the guy has a working penis if he wants to be intimate with a partner. Obviously sucks if you like receptive intercourse. But it's not like he can never have sex again. Not cancer. But I had a complete hysterectomy last year. I'm also prone to keloid scars. I can't even use my vibrator the same way, let alone duck properly. But hey, I don't have endometriosis anymore, I guess. Hey, are you me? Keloids and endometriosis. I do wonder if they're related. Like if the keloids are forming internally from the adhesions and tearing. I'm probably going to need a hysterectomy down the road. Any advice about anything that helps? I'm not a surgeon, but when I was in med school there was an oh shit moment for everyone, including the surgeons, anesthetists, nurses and students. They were prepping a patient for surgery and put him under, and the nurse said okay, he's out, before they were about to start slicing him open. The patient just had enough strength to move his head from side to side and said no, I'm not out yet. Everyone laughed it off, but if the patient didn't do that it could have ended badly. This is one of my worst fears. Not being out. Just immobilized and undergoing surgery due to a bad anesthesiologist. Not even sure if that could really happen. But I don't like thinking about it. Happened to my mother when she had a C-section while giving birth to my brother. In those days they would knock you out for C-sections, but use as little anesthetic as possible to protect the baby. They gave her enough that she couldn't move, but she was still awake and felt everything. She was pretty traumatized. The vast majority of C-sections are done with a spinal block, not general anesthesia, so the mother is 100% conscious. They just can't feel anything below their abdomen. Now, yes, this was 40 years ago. Back then they would give you GA. Not a surgeon, but was working in obstetric theatre in UK mid-heatwave last year. This is important as maternity wards are kept quite warm as newborn babies aren't good at regulating their temperatures. Combine this with a heatwave and the fact that in Britain we're not exactly used to high temperatures and we have the perfect storm. Mid-emergency Caesarean, the scrub nurse assisting the op starts feeling faint. This is unusual as this scrub nurse worked in these theatres full time, so this was her bread and butter. So I can only conclude it was the heat. She has to step out, so the show takes her place assisting the obs registrar with the section. This show looked extremely junior, as in first section ever, and they were trying to assist with the instruments in the uterus when they fainted. I had to jump in and grab the back of their theatre gown to stop them faceplanting the open uterus, and then sort of gently tug backwards to let them fall into me when someone else has taken over assisting. This show was not exactly small. Thank God the baby was already out. This happened to my wife when she was having a planned C-section to deliver our youngest. There were some med students standing and viewing that morning. Real nice kids. We had no problems with them observing. Shortly after things got underway, one of the young men started to look wobbly in the legs, then fell out, fainted, took out a rolling tray of instruments, launching it across the room. As he rapidly descended towards inevitable fate of head meeting with cold hard tile, he was promptly carted off, and we never found out what happened to that young man. I only hope that, if he chose to remain in the medical field, his constitution has improved. He was born for radiology. I was the patient. I had a liver transplant and was having an ERC done to place a new bile duct stent. Well, apparently my anatomy is different than normal, and my lungs go more down my sides. So he accidentally caused a nick, which caused a hemothorax. So when I woke up I couldn't breathe. They did an x-ray and had to do a chest tube. Eventually I was so exhausted I asked to be vented, so he vented me. Apparently he cried, he felt so bad about it all. But it wasn't him being malicious or negligent. It was simply an accident. Sometimes things happen. You can be the best in the world and still make a mistake. Exactly. It wasn't fun considering it was supposed to be an outpatient procedure that turned into a 2-week hospital stay with 3 chest tubes and a couple weird med reactions. Couple of those days were IQ as well. 8 years after finishing medical school and deferring student loans through residency and fellowship and realizing that I was closer to 40 than 30 with over $200. 000 of debt. Capital F. 5th year resident here. There are lots of bad oh shit moments throughout training. Such necrotizing soft tissue infections or takebacks for bad complications or deaths during cases. However, I'd like to share a recent positive oh shit moment. 15 cm kidney tumor with thrombus into the vena cava. Big incision. Great exposure of the vasculature in the tumor. My attending and I are dancing around the aorta and vena cava. We are able to feel the tumor thrombus in the IVC. I was expecting that we'd need to cut and clamp the vena cava to get all the cancer out. But my attending literally squeezes the tumor out of the vena cava back into the renal vein, and then has me tie the renal vein off so the tumor doesn't slip back into the vena cava. Patient went home in like 4 days. Margins were negative, and is still doing great. First time I felt like oh shit, I'm a surgeon. Squeezed, like a tube of toothpaste. Yikes. Schlorp. I hate you. With no suction. It was probably more of a skloomp. Not a surgeon, but I was observing a hand surgery about a year ago at a teaching hospital. The surgeon was removing one of the carpals, the bones near the base of the hand, to be used later. A nurse was given the carpal to hold until it needed to be used. She ended up dropping the patient's bone on the ground. Not me, but my uncle. He is a respirologist and was supervising sitting in on lung surgery to remove a tumor. Turns out the tumor was a root ball. Some type of seed had gotten into the patient's lungs and started to grow. Damn watermelons. I am having flashbacks from the video now. My grandfather told a story about a clamp coming off an artery while he was pulling a kidney in rural Wyoming in the early 50s. The abdominal cavity was quickly filling with blood and the nurse fainted. He was able to push down with his elbow on the descending aorta and got the clamp back on. Patient lived, but I think he chose his surgical assistants little more carefully after that. A lot of fainting nurses in this thread, and my first reaction is, why are you a nurse? But I'm wondering if they were caught off guard themselves by their body's reaction. Does anyone know of experience fainting unexpectedly at the sight or smell of something? Like you thought you could handle a thing. The thing happens, and lights out. Obviously I'd expect nurses in an OR to be used to it, but you can definitely be caught off guard. The first time I had a patient with a gory injury, fingers amputated via a lawnmower, my actual thinking brain was fascinated, and I leaned in to get a closer look at what was going on. Something in my little lizard brain had a different idea though, because I started to feel very lightheaded and clammy, and ended up stepping away for a few moments. I was almost offended at my own brain for betraying me. I genuinely wanted to see what was going on and assess the injury, but my body had a different reaction. This person's seen some shit. Not a surgeon, but I was having surgery on my breast to remove what they suspected was cancer. It was benign, but either way I woke up during the surgery and I looked up and saw 4 people with scrub caps on, staring down at me. I looked at my boob in pure horror, and that is all I remember because they knocked me back out. Still makes me want to vomit thinking about it. I was only 13. That sounds truly awful. I sincerely hope you never experience anything as bad as that again. During my 3rd year of medical school, I was stitching up the wound after breast cancer surgery, and the anesthesiology nurse woke the patient too early as I was making my last stick, and I felt the patient moving her arm and trying to sit up. Patient was still covered in surgery draping and cables and still intubated. Luckily most people do not remember much from the first moments after waking up, but I got quite nervous from the patient starting to move. And admittedly so. I would imagine that would have been terrifying. Just an RN here. I was working in the ER and had a patient brought in by her husband. Apparently the woman had a fall a week prior and injured her face but refused medical care. Her husband finally forced her to come in. As soon as I see the wound on her face, from across the room, I think, that does not look like any wound I've seen. I approached her and realized maggots had infested the wound and were eating the rotting skin. A really simple and quick fix, but I can't imagine her living conditions. I choose to imagine the wound was cleaned out of wild maggots and then sterile medical grade maggots were used to clean up the dead flesh. But isn't really the right word there. Edit. Better word suggested in responses. Choose might be a suitable alternative. I choose to imagine that the maggots were an intentional part of the therapy. When I was in pharmacy school, I was doing my internal medicine rotation in my final year. My preceptor and I were doing med reviews in the ICU when one of the pulmonary docs was basically like, "Hey, you wanna see something cool?" They were trying to extract a foreign object from a guy's lung in one of the rooms. So we go in and watch for a bit. About 6 people in the room. Tube down the guy's throat. Little grippers at the end. 2 doctors watching a monitor and trying to control the grabbers and get it like a claw game. I watched for a bit, then after a while I lost interest and went back out to what I was doing. A few minutes later I hear, "Got it," cheers from the room. Oh, it's a tooth. Dude aspirated his own molar. Doctor walks out with his trophy in a jar and it's a completely intact tooth, root and all. Damn. How does that happen? Is it possible that he had gotten into a fight where it got knocked out and he swallowed it? Apparently he was already in the hospital when it happened. He was pretty sick. Tooth must have fallen out and he inhaled it. Ended up with aspiration pneumonia. They saw something was in there when they did the chest x-ray after the pneumonia developed. Not a surgeon, but when I was in nursing school I was observing a tonsillectomy when the power went out. Everything switched over to the backup generators except for the suction, which is incredibly important for any surgery but particularly in the throat. Aspiration risk. They ended up having to connect a giant syringe to a length of suction tubing to suction manually while someone went to the other side of the building to find portable suction. Luckily ours was the only theater that had started operating that morning. I am terrified of complications due to tonsillectomies. I had to ligate a carotid artery of a 14-year-old because he wouldn't stop bleeding from a botched tonsillectomy. I hate face and neck vessels. The bitches bleed like there is no tomorrow. This is by far the most responses from the actual profession that is being asked that I have ever seen. This is interesting. Usually they are like lawyers of Reddit. Then 928,484 people are like him, not a lawyer. But I train ladybugs and this and that. What do you train the ladybugs to do? Open heart surgery apparently. Not mine, but my father's. He told me this back when I was 10. So I'm sorry if it doesn't fully make sense. He had a 21-year-old patient that needed to have a pinectomy. He had cancer of the penis. There were 2 oh shit moments for this. The first is a common thing. He wasn't fully asleep. The second, however, is funny and humiliating. They are about to start the surgery. Suddenly, one of the nurses that was there suddenly threw up and left. A test later, and boom, she got knocked up. Halfway through the surgery, the other nurse leaves for a call about her father. My dad's just standing there, a half-gone penis in his hand. He calls for help, and is standing there, a guy's penis in his hand for 30 minutes. 8 years of medical school and he can't even stand around with his own dick in his hand anymore. I woke up during a bronchoscope. That was interesting. Thankfully a scope and not an incision. I was in a car accident many years ago and had surgery to clean up the scars. I woke up during the middle of it. It wasn't painful as it felt like pressure on my face. But the surgeon was certainly surprised to see me open my eyes. He nodded to the anesthesiologist and that's all I remember from there. Bro, you actually watched the whole video. I'd give you a high five if I was a human. Make sure to click the like button and subscribe for more great content. See you next time.